Serious sailors. Seamen and overall people who spend a vast amount of time in the ocean. Have you ever witnessed something you would catalog as supernatural or unusual? What was it like? Sailed on tall ships for a good while. Among other things. Saw some green flashes. A moon bow. Lots of phosphorescence. Big whales. Almost fire on our mast steel ship this time. But the only creepy story was at port. The only person who had ever died on the ship was over 100 years ago. And he fell from the rigging. Went splat. One of the crew was up furling sails. And was about to step out onto the foot rope that runs along the yard. He said he got an overwhelming urge to not step on it. And felt a tug on his harness keeping him from stepping out. He was so freaked out he kept the other two guys behind him from getting on the line as well. The other guys started getting a really bad feeling too. And they decided to check out the foot rope. It had been really degrading on the inside. Even through the outside looked mostly fine. The line probably would have snapped as they climbed out there. And they would have fallen. As you are pretty much free climbing until you get to a stopping point. I was on navigation watch with the second mate one night off the Philippines. The ship was on autopilot making for Manila. It was a clear, still, dark night. Through the binoculars I picked up navigation lights of another ship about 5 degrees off the port bow. It was well off, but I noted the bearing and checked the radar. Nothing. This was not unusual. If it was one of the small local fishing vessels, they can be hard to pick up. On the other hand, they usually don't bother with navigation lights either. Quickish technical detail. Skip. If familiar with the purpose and function of NAV lights, navigation lights on a vessel are baffled so they can only be seen from a certain direction. Looking at a boat dead ahead. Coming toward you. You will see a red light to the right of a green light. This is what I could see. If the boat turns to their right, or starboard, the two lights will begin to move together. And the green light will fade from view because of the baffles that are around it. As the turn continues, you will be able to see the red port their left side light only. And a bit later the white stern light will appear as the red fades behind its baffles. This way you can tell in an instant the orientation of another vessel in the dark. 10 minutes passed and I checked the bearing again. Still 5 degrees off the port bow. Red and green visible. I checked the radar again. Still nothing. I alerted the second mate. 5 minutes later. Nothing changed. Nothing on radar. We were on a collision bearing with an invisible vessel that was steadily getting closer. As a precaution we switched back to manual steering and I took the helm. By now I could make out the lights without the binoculars. Still coming directly at us. We were on the point of taking evasive measures when suddenly the lights started moving together. We assumed that the other vessel had finally spotted us and was turning away to their right. I was expecting the red light to fade from view. Except it didn't. The two lights simply swapped position, the red went to the left and the green went to the right. They remained 5 degrees off the port bow. And then they moved back again. Still. Nothing on radar. Nothing through the binoculars. We eventually passed the lights within 20 meters. From the wing of the bridge I could see with perfect clarity straight down at it. Whatever it was. There was nothing to see except the two lights. One red and one green. Floating freely in air about 10 feet above the ocean. Reflecting back off the waves. Gently and occasionally swapping positions in the night. I saw almost the same phenomenon. They were over the countryside in the Pacific Northwest. At high altitude. In the middle of the day. There was one red light. And one green light. And they were dancing around each other. For lack of a better term. In alternating synchronized. Then desynchronized patterns. It was hard to tell exactly how large they were. My estimate is that they were at least 10,000 AGL and about 30 to 40 feet in diameter. They would accelerate instantly from a complete standstill to what was, based on my estimation of their size and altitude, hypersonic speed, then decelerate to a complete standstill just as quickly. They didn't seem to have any kind of inertia, accelerating from one axis to the next without any kind of intermediary yaw or bank. My friends spotted them first, and then after taking a moment to point them out to the rest of us, they were way up there. We all stared at them for a good 15 minutes. Crazy stuff. Flew helicopters in the Navy for a few years. On my first deployment to Southeast Asia, I was flying over the Sea of Japan and saw a large pulsing aura of red light far enough below the surface I could not make out a source. We were 30-ish miles from shore and had not been briefed on any assets in the area that might make something like that make sense. No erroneous indications on instruments or radio chatter. Just slow, steady pulsing red light. We saw it, circled it a few times, made a note of the time and location we encountered it, and my crew chief asked if I wouldn't mind getting the hell out of there. So we finished our transit and I made a note of everything in my debrief. I passed it up the chain of command, but they basically wrote it off as some sort of visual phenomenon we had from a long day of flying in dry suits. It's always been hard to imagine our entire crew hallucinating the same thing. Undefined. When I was roving patrol on a submarine, I always thought I saw someone walking parallel to me down missile compartment upper level. If I was on the port side, then I saw them on the starboard side and vice versa. I always chalked it up to pipes and valves creating weird shadows. Additionally, it felt heavy on that level, like there was some sort of presence, the feeling you get when someone's watching you. I never told anyone. Then one day, a few weeks into patrol, one of the other rovers asked me if it felt weird up there. He specifically said that he saw someone up there too, just like I had. We shared stories and then talked to the third rover, and he said I only go up there to do my rounds every hour, then get the beep out of that haunted level. Fog. I don't care what anyone says. There is something in that fog. Edit, not a joke. A dead calm with thick fog is creepy and will drive you to wild hallucinations. I imagine it's not dissimilar to a sensory deprivation chamber. I have a story about almost getting run down by an 800 feet Great Lakes freighter in a thick fog bank. We were on a 35 feet racing sailboat. Couldn't see the bow from the cockpit. Fog was so bad. A crew member said, "I hear a bow wake," and moments later, a wall of steel appeared out of the fog. We were sailing right into the side of it. We could have touched it with a boat pole. That was the most scared I've ever been on the water. The closest to supernatural, or at least something I can't explain, happened halfway between Cornwall and the Scillies. We were sailing in a fresh breeze. 5 to 6 feet. Swells maybe. That's perfectly fine sailing weather, but the boat will rock and there will be quite a bit of noise from the wind, the sails and waves. So we sail happy along when suddenly the sea is perfectly flat and everything is quiet. Like somebody turned the sound off. I look around and the water is pitch dark. It only lasted for a minute and then everything was back to normal, but I got a really eerie feeling. I have a theory. I think you sailed over a large patch of spilled oil. Oil stops waves. Half serious, but this would explain the ocean's color, and in large enough quantity. The oil could suppress the swell. Sailors back in the old days used to dump their cooking oil if the seas were rough enough. In the Gulf of Aden, having been at sea for a while and with absolutely blistering heat, I heard my nickname called 3 times. Clearly and loudly. It was my first time with this particular crew and none of them knew my nickname. My best guess is dehydration and stress, but I'll never forget it. I hope your nickname isn't Man Overboard. I crewed on a tall ship and we were anchored with a bunch of others in a harbor. We had to take shifts at night because it was an old boat and did weird things. I was on shift in the little steering cabin when I heard someone running around the deck. I thought it was one of the other crew, so I poked my head out and told them to knock it off. They kept running and I was afraid they'd slip, so I followed them. We went around the whole ship twice before I caught up with a shapeless shadow which stopped and flew directly up into the air. Convinced it was a prank, I walked back to the end of the boat when I saw we had drifted on anchor and were almost under the bow of a much larger ship. I called the rest of the crew and we sorted it out. But I might not have noticed until too late if it weren't for the weird shadow.